Imagine living in a world where the loudest voice is mistaken for the wisest, where virality overrides virtue and the applause of the crowd drowns out the whisper of the soul. Stop imagining that world is here. In an era when information is more accessible than ever, true wisdom has become strangely scarce. Why does modern life so often celebrate ignorance, mediocrity, and surface-level spectacle while silencing depth, thoughtful reflection, and honest assessment? Why do thinkers retreat into the shadows while entertainers occupy the center stage? These are not idle complaints. They are symptoms of a broad cultural shift that demands we look squarely at what we have lost and why it matters. To understand this, we must first clarify what wisdom is and what it is not. Wisdom is not raw intelligence, not a repository of facts, nor the ability to craft a clever turn of phrase for social approval. Wisdom is the steady art of recognizing complexity, of admitting uncertainty, and of resisting the seduction of easy answers. As Socrates taught, wisdom begins with the admission of how little we truly know. It is born of humility, refined by experience, and expressed through measured speech rather than flash. Wisdom is patient. It unfolds slowly and often invisibly. It values long listening over immediate applause and subtlety over spectacle. Our culture, however, has shifted its compass toward speed. We worship immediacy. We revere the quick, the catchy, the bite-sized insight that travels faster than thought. Public figures amass followers for controversy more often than for contribution. Influencers profit from shock more than from substance. Politicians package complexity into slogans designed to move emotions rather than to cultivate understanding. In such a climate, to be loud is to be heard. To be cautious, reflective, and unsure is to be dismissed as irrelevant. The incentives push toward extremes, a generation drowning in information, but starving for wisdom. This transformation did not occur by accident. The architecture of attention is decisive. Social platforms are engineered to capture and monetize your nervous system. Algorithms amplify outrage, polarization, and provocation because those responses keep attention locked and engagement high. Newsrooms under pressure prioritize speed and sensation over context and depth. Educational institutions, constrained by standardized metrics and funding pressures, often emphasize measurable outputs over the cultivation of inner life. When incentives favor reaction over reflection, the social equilibrium tips towards superficiality. The consequences are visible everywhere. Meaningful conversation is replaced by performative shouting matches. Nuance is scorned. Complexity is mocked as a flaw. Ask yourself when you last watched a calm, intelligent exchange go viral. When did certainty become more admired than curiosity in public leaders? Ancient societies treated wisdom as civic staple. The Greeks called philosophers lovers of wisdom. Confucius urged inner harmony and moral clarity. Other traditions place wisdom at the center of communal life. Today we say we admire the wise, but reward spectacle. Carl Jung observed that thinking is hard and most people prefer easy judgment. And modern systems have made thinking more costly and reaction more convenient. There is also a political dimension. Those who profit from distraction are seldom those who want widespread critical thinking. Advertisers favor an audience that feels rather than thinks. Political operatives benefit from populations that react rather than reflect. When attention is fractured, persuasion is easier. Distraction is a tool of predictability. This is not a single organized conspiracy, but the alignment of commercial, technological, and political incentives that make a distracted populace easier to manage. The loss of wisdom is not only intellectual, it is moral and spiritual. Viktor Frankl wrote that when people lack meaning, they seek distraction and pleasure as a substitute. Our culture offers many diversions and too little meaning. Pleasure becomes an anesthetic for emptiness. The true labor wisdom, confronting ignorance, owning complicity, facing faults without self-deception, demands courage most people reserve for crisis. It asks us to look honestly into ourselves, to examine motives, biases, and comforts we prefer to avoid. Even more insidious, foolishness is normalized through humor, irony, and entertainment. When foolishness is made funny, it becomes acceptable. When acceptability spreads, absence of wisdom becomes invisible. Consider how often you choose content that comforts rather than challenges you. How often do you sit with a difficult idea for more than a few minutes without reaching for your phone? Awareness is the first step toward recovery. Without noticing the drift, revival cannot begin. Yet wisdom has not vanished. It has gone into hiding like a seed beneath winter soil. It survives in unread books, in patient conversations, in quiet practices of solitude and reflection. It lives with people who still prefer meaning to mirth and depth to spectacle. If you are willing to look inward rather than constantly outward, wisdom can be found within you and around you. We must also notice how institutions steer us away from depth. Schools increasingly reward outputs that can be measured rather than the moral imagination that cannot be captured by tests. Workplaces prize visible productivity over patient deliberation. Practices that once sought to expand the soul are repackaged as optimization tasks and sold as productivity hacks. Metrics replace judgment. Efficiency crowds out contemplation. This slow, bureaucratic commodification operates politely and pervasively, making depth structurally inconvenient. Wisdom is neither wholly private nor merely public. It requires solitude to be cultivated and community to be sustained. Solitude clarifies perception. Conversation refines understanding. The person who thinks carefully does not hoard insight like a trophy. They translate seeing into conduct that steadies others. Revival will not come from isolated gurus alone, but from ordinary people practicing attention, courage, and integrity in daily life. Small acts of reflection multiplied across networks of people create cultural change. Take this as a summons rather than an obituary. The death of wisdom is avoidable. The resources that once nourished civilizations, unread books, patient teachers, long conversations, and disciplined practice, still exist. Choosing them over distraction is a quiet rebellion with outsized consequences. If a part of you resists the shallow tide, you are not alone. There are many who prefer books to feeds, silence to noise, and depth to spectacle. Consider the cultural consequences plainly. When wisdom is scarce, public life becomes brittle. Debate loses its capacity to persuade and turns into spectacle that deepens division rather than revealing truth. Policy is driven by popularity rather than prudence. Relationships grow transactional because we value impression over interior character. The result is a society louder but less anchored, more connected yet less meaningful. Observe how authenticity itself has been commodified. Mindfulness becomes a checkbox. Vulnerability becomes content. Moral clarity is reduced to branding. Ancient practices meant to orient human beings toward the good are repurposed as life hacks. The sacred language of reflection is translated into marketable slogans, stripping practices of the demanding core and leaving an easy simulacrum in their place. Philosophers from different eras warned us about similar dangers. Nietzsche on truth and illusion, Neil Postman on amusement eroding public life, Stoic and Eastern teachers on simplicity and inner freedom. Their ideas are practical maps for living when culture tempts us toward distraction. So what does revival look like in daily detail? It starts with guarding attention as a primary practice. Schedule uninterrupted time for reading, resist reflexive posting, and allow boredom without filling instantly. It requires the courage to admit ignorance and ask better questions rather than seeking approval with quick answers. It means choosing conversations that stretch rather than confirm, forming small communities where depth is practiced rather than performed, and translating inner clarity into acts that benefit others. This is not an invitation to retreat from the world, but to engage it differently, less performatively, and more faithfully. In the next segment, we will move from diagnosis to practice. We will outline concrete habits, reading suggestions, conversation prompts, and environmental changes that help make wisdom a daily way of living. Keep listening. The work begins in ordinary moments and small choices. Now is your chance to choose differently, starting with a single breath. The glorification of stupidity is not just a cultural quirk. It is a systematic drift that has become embedded in the very structure of modern life. If wisdom feels scarce, it is because everything around us is designed to keep it scarce. Apps compete for our focus with endless notifications, hijacking our nervous system. News outlets thrive on outrage because outrage sells better than understanding. Schools, under the constant pressure to produce measurable results, reduce students to statistics and teachers to exam preparers. The The result is a society where there is no time to reflect, only to react. And when reflection is lost, wisdom is discarded as an inconvenience. This discarding is rarely deliberate. No one openly declares, "We reject wisdom." Instead, it disappears through neglect, through the slow preference for what is quick, easy, and gratifying. The erosion is subtle. It's not a dramatic attack on deep thinking, but a gradual drift towards shallowness. We scroll instead of study. We comment instead of converse. We consume instead of contemplate. We reward certainty even when that certainty is shallow. And over time, a population accustomed to speed begins to treat depth as an obstacle rather than as a gift. Consider the heroes we celebrate. Once, sages and scholars were revered. Now, celebrities dominate our discourse, not because they illuminate, but because they entertain. Politicians are chosen not for their ability to wrestle with complexity, but for their ability to deliver a soundbite. Influencers are rewarded not for their wisdom, but for their constant visibility. The message is clear. Fame is more valuable than knowledge, visibility more important than truth, and whoever shouts the loudest deserves to be heard the most. Philosopher Neil Postman warned decades ago that the greatest danger was not censorship but amusement, that we would drown in a sea of triviality and mistake distraction for knowledge. His words are hauntingly accurate now. We are overstimulated but under-reflective, constantly connected but deeply unanchored. We no longer even recognize the absence of wisdom, because foolishness has been dressed up as humor, wrapped in irony, and normalized through entertainment. When stupidity becomes funny, it becomes acceptable. And when it is accepted, it becomes invisible. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, when was the last time you consumed content that truly challenged you, not offended you, but unsettled your assumptions? When was the last time you sat with a thought for longer than 5 minutes without reaching for your phone, without rushing for distraction? These questions matter because awareness is the doorway back to wisdom. If we cannot see what we have lost, we cannot begin to recover it. The cost of wisdom's death is profound. It is not only intellectual, but emotional and spiritual. Without wisdom, people become more reactive, more fragmented, more easily manipulated. They fall into tribal conflict, mistaking noise for truth and division for conviction. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust, observed that when people lack meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. Look around. Our culture is obsessed with pleasure, but starving for meaning. Wisdom is the bridge between those two. It does not simply tell us how to live. It tells us why to live. And perhaps that is why it has been pushed aside. Because wisdom demands confrontation. It asks us to look in the mirror, to face our own ignorance, our own insecurities, our own complicity in the systems we blame. It does not flatter us. It challenges us. And challenge is uncomfortable. It is easier to laugh at stupidity than to sit in silence with wisdom. Easier to distract ourselves than to question ourselves. Easier to be entertained than to be transformed. But the fact that you are still listening means that somewhere inside, you hunger for more than distraction. You hunger for something deeper. So what can we do? The first step is reclaiming our attention. Guard it like sacred ground. What you focus on shapes who you become. Algorithms are designed to define your beliefs if you let them. But you can resist. Read more than you scroll. Think more than you react. Reflect more than you speak. Choose deliberately what you allow into your mind, because every piece of attention is a seed, and those seeds grow into the architecture of your soul. The second step is questioning what is glorified. Popularity does not equal value. Fame does not equal wisdom. Charisma is not the same as character. Entertainment is not enlightenment. If we fail to distinguish these, we fall into the trap of mistaking visibility for truth. We must learn to celebrate substance even when it is not trending, to value depth even when it is not viral. The third step is seeking silence. Wisdom does not scream, it whispers. And to hear it, we must be still. Solitude is not a punishment. It is a discipline. Take time for silence. Sit with your own thoughts without rushing to escape them. Let difficult questions linger without forcing quick answers. Stillness is uncomfortable, but it is the soil where wisdom grows. Finally, We must build what might be called a philosophical tribe, a community that values growth, truth, and depth. Stupidity spreads quickly because it is contagious. But so is wisdom. Surround yourself with people and ideas that elevate you, that challenge you to see more clearly, that make you pause and reflect rather than rush to judgment. The people around you shape the person you become. If we take these steps, we begin to see that the glorification of stupidity is not just a cultural trend, but a deeper erosion, a spiritual collapse. Modern obsession with superficiality is not merely destroying our public discourse. It is hollowing out our very souls. Wisdom is not just intellectual, it is spiritual, because it asks not just how to live, but why. It seeks the eternal and the temporary, the invisible beneath the visible. And this is exactly why our material-driven culture resists it. In a society addicted to speed and spectacle, introspection is treated as a disease. You think too much, people say, as if thought were a liability. This disdain for depth is not accidental. It is institutionalized. Schools reward memorization over imagination. Workplaces reward productivity over reflection. Social media reward polarity over nuance. Each of these systems penalizes complexity and rewards conformity. And so wisdom doesn't vanish through attack. It is quietly displaced, made inconvenient, until people forget what it feels like to think deeply at all. Who benefits from this? Those who wish to control. Distracted minds are compliant minds. Shallow people are easier to manipulate than thoughtful ones. This is not conspiracy. It is psychology. If people lose the ability to question, they are easier to sell to, easier to govern, easier to distract. As Epicurus said, only the educated are free. But education has been confused with indoctrination. We teach people what to think, not how to think. We flood them with opinions, but starve them with perspective. And in this starvation, the soul forgets how to seek. Ask yourself, when was the last time you saw a movie that celebrated a truly wise person? Not a genius or a rebel, but someone whose quiet depth was honored? When was the last time you saw a trending video that rewarded humility, clarity, or moral courage? We don't celebrate those values anymore. We commodify them. Even authenticity is marketed now. Even mindfulness has been turned into an app notification. Meditation is sold not as stillness, but as productivity. Reading is sold not as insight, but as branding. Transcendence has been traded for transaction. And the tragedy is that most people don't notice. But despite all this, the hunger for wisdom remains. It whispers in quiet moments. It surfaces when hours of scrolling leave you feeling hollow. It returns when you sit in nature and realize, however briefly, that life is more than consumption. The human spirit still longs for depth. Abraham Maslow called this longing the need for self-actualization, the desire to become who we truly are, not as society defines us, but as we are in essence. That journey cannot happen without wisdom. Knowledge may inform us, but wisdom transforms us. Wisdom tells us we are beyond our roles, beyond our possessions, beyond our social media profiles. It tells us that happiness without purpose is just anesthesia. It invites us back to the truths echoed across civilizations. The Bhagavad Gita teaching that true knowledge unites action and reflection. The Tao Te Ching reminding us that to know ourselves is greater than to know others. The Gospel of Thomas warning that what we fail to bring forth within us will destroy us. These voices across time point to the same truth. Wisdom is not out there, but in here, waiting beneath fear, ego, and distraction. But accessing it requires courage. The courage to be misunderstood. The courage to step away from the crowd. The courage to sit with uncomfortable truths. Wisdom requires a kind of death. The death of the false self. The part of us that craves approval more than authenticity. To live wisely is to shed skin after skin until we become who we truly are. That is terrifying, and yet it is the only path that leads to freedom. Because once we begin to live from that place, something dangerous to the status quo happens. The wise are not easily controlled. They are not easily entertained. They are not impressed by illusion. They do not seek external validation because they act from inner authority. And in a world addicted to manipulation and distraction, this is revolutionary. In the next segment, we will explore how to resurrect wisdom in your daily life, practically, spiritually, and culturally. We will look at the small shifts that bring you back to clarity, back to meaning, back to truth. Because wisdom is not gone forever. It is waiting. The only question is whether you will answer the call. If the first part was a diagnosis of wisdom's decline, and the second part was a guide to personal and communal practices for recovery, this final part is a vision. What could society look like if we truly valued wisdom again? To imagine this, we must dare to picture what seems almost utopian, but is, in fact, practical if pursued one choice at a time. Wisdom has always been countercultural. It whispers when culture shouts. It pauses when culture rushes. It doubts when culture insists. Yet history shows that even small groups of people committed to depth can reshape entire civilizations. The Stoics influenced Rome. Monastic traditions preserved knowledge during centuries of upheaval. Sages in every era have planted seeds that outlasted the noise of their time. If they did it in worlds equally distracted and chaotic, so can we. But first, let's imagine a reversal of our current trajectory. Instead of algorithms rewarding outrage, where they rewarded patience, curiosity, and genuine dialogue, instead of schools treating wisdom as an optional extra, what if they place it at the center, teaching not just facts but the art of living? Instead of workplaces chasing endless output, what if leaders recognize that the best decisions come from reflection, not exhaustion? A wise society is not one where problems vanish, but one where we meet them with maturity rather than hysteria. The qualities of a wise culture. Attention as sacred. In a wise culture, attention is not endlessly fragmented. It is guarded as one guards a precious resource. Silence is not feared but sought. People do not measure their value by constant visibility. Instead, the rhythm of life includes pauses, unstructured moments where thought and creativity emerge naturally. Imagine cities designed with quiet spaces, families protecting time without screens, communities choosing depth over spectacle. Dialogue is practice. A wise culture prizes conversation over debate. Dialogue is not a contest to win, but a dance to understand. People listen not only for agreement, but for discovery. Imagine classrooms where disagreement is welcomed as an opportunity to refine ideas rather than as a threat. Imagine online platforms where the measure of value is the sincerity of engagement rather than the volume of reaction. Humility as strength. In such a culture, leaders are not admired for certainty, but for their ability to admit when they are wrong. Intellectual humility becomes a badge of honor, not a mark of weakness. Wisdom thrives where egos shrink, where learning is constant, and where people recognize that reality is always larger than our grasp of it. Meaning over amusement. Entertainment still exists, but it does not consume everything. Amusement is balanced by meaning. People know the difference between distraction and fulfillment, and they deliberately choose practices that deepen rather than dilute their humanity. Of course, dreaming of such a culture is not enough. We face real obstacles. The economic system thrives on distraction because it drives consumption. Shallow engagement is profitable, deep reflection is not. The political system benefits from polarized thinking. Nuance is less effective at mobilizing large crowds. The technological system is built for scale, and scale amplifies simplicity more than complexity. To revive wisdom, then, is to resist not only personal temptation, but systemic momentum. It requires courage to be unpopular, patience to be misunderstood, and resilience to persist in practices that bear fruit slowly. Seeds of revival. Yet there are already signs of resistance. The rising interest in long-form podcasts, where conversations stretch for hours instead of seconds. The growing appeal of digital minimalism, and people deliberately choosing to unplug. Movements for slow living, mindfulness, and intentional communities. The hunger for ancient philosophy, from Stoicism to Buddhism, as guides for modern life. These are not isolated trends, but signals that beneath the noise, something deeper is stirring. Revival rarely begins from the top. It starts with individuals, small groups, small practices, but when multiplied, they ripple outward. Consider the early spread of literacy. It began in monasteries and local schools, not empires. Or the civil rights movement, born in churches and kitchens before it reshaped law. Wisdom revival will not come as a single sweeping revolution, but as millions of quiet acts, a person choosing to read instead of scroll, a teacher encouraging dialogue instead of memorization, a leader admitting uncertainty instead of faking certainty. Practical commitments for the future. If you wish to live as an agent of this revival, here are practices to commit to, not as rules but as daily companions. Guard your mornings. Begin the day without immediate noise. Read, write, or sit in silence before screens intrude. Choose quality over quantity. Fewer books, but deeper reading. Fewer conversations, but more intentional ones. Resist spectacle. Ask yourself before sharing or reacting, am I adding light or just heat? Honor solitude. Do not fear being alone with your thoughts. It is the soil of wisdom. Mentor others. Share what you learn not as superiority, but as service. Wisdom multiplies when given away. Anchor in meaning. Ask daily, does this action align with what I most deeply value? These small acts, multiplied across lives, create cultural change. Why this matters. Without wisdom, knowledge becomes dangerous. Technology grows faster than ethics, and power outruns responsibility. History shows civilizations collapsing not from lack of resources, but from moral and intellectual decay. When people can no longer tell wisdom from foolishness, the loudest demagogue replaces a careful thinker, and the cycle repeats. To resist this decline is not merely personal preference. It is a civilizational necessity. As T.S. Eliot once asked, where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? That question is sharper now than ever. To answer it, we must rebuild not only how we live, but how we see. You who have listened this far are already resisting. You would not remain with this message if a part of you did not hunger for more than noise. You are not powerless. Every time you slow down, every time you think carefully, every time you honor silence or listen deeply, you are part of the quiet revolution. Do not underestimate the force of example. Others notice. A friend may feel permission to be slower because you chose slowness. A child may learn reflection because you practiced it. A community may deepen because you created space for it. Change begins invisibly, then becomes inevitable. So let this be your charge. Protect your attention as a sacred gift. Pursue truth with humility. Choose meaning over distraction and share what you learn without pride. Let wisdom be not an abstract ideal, but a lived reality in your time. And remember, wisdom does not demand perfection. It asks only that you return again and again to what matters most. Even in failure, the turning back is itself a form of wisdom. The world will not suddenly applaud you for this path. But long after the noise fades, wisdom remains. It has outlived empires, trends, algorithms, and fashions. It will outlive our age too. The only question is whether we will walk with it or wander further from it. Choose wisely.